I'm Alex Turner, 29, and I spent 3 years in jail for a robbery I didn't do. The proof seemed solid: camera footage, people who saw it happen. Even my story didn't hold up in court. I watched my life fall apart as the judge said guilty. But what the lawyers didn't know, what my own offender missed, was sitting in a hospital folder just 12 miles away. The truth that would change everything they thought they knew about that night and show a lie that went deeper than anyone thought. If you've ever felt beaten down by a system that let you down, like and subscribe for stories that show sometimes the biggest truths hide in the most simple places. This is my story of how one missing piece of paper changed everything. March 15, 2019. I'll never forget that date, not because of what happened to me later, but because of what saved me. I was working late at the auto repair shop, trying to finish a brake job before closing. The pain hit me like lightning in my gut, so sharp I dropped my wrench and doubled over on the garage floor. My co-worker Jake found me there, sweating and shaking. "You look like death, man," he said, his face full of worry. The pain was getting worse by the minute, radiating from my right side like someone was twisting a knife inside me. Jake drove me to Mercy General Hospital, running red lights while I groaned in the passenger seat. The hospital wristband they put on me felt cold against my skin. Turner, Alex Dobb, August 14, 1989, time 7:23 p.m. I remember staring at those numbers, not knowing they would become the most important digits of my life. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Morrison, was a kind woman with gentle hands. She pressed on my stomach, and I nearly jumped off the table. "Classic appendicitis," she said. "We need to get you into surgery right away. Your appendix is ready to burst." Everything happened so fast after that. Nurses wheeling me down bright hospital hallways, my mom rushing and still wearing her work uniform. The anesthesiologist explaining what would happen. The surgery was scheduled for 8:45 p.m. They said, for hours of work to save my life. As they put the mask over my face, I remember thinking how lucky I was. Lucky to have Jake find me, lucky to get to the hospital in time, lucky to have good doctors. I had no idea that this same night, just 12 miles away, someone was robbing a convenience store. Someone who looked enough like me to change my whole world. The surgery went perfectly. Dr. Morrison removed my appendix before it could rupture, cleaning out the infection that could have killed me. I woke up in recovery at 1:15 a.m., groggy but alive. My mom was holding my hand, tears in her eyes. "You scared me," she whispered. "I thought I was going to lose you." If only we had known that the real fight for my life was just beginning. That hospital wristband, those surgery times, the detailed medical records being filed the way they were my lifeline. But nobody knew it yet. I spent 2 days recovering, grateful for modern medicine and skilled doctors. When I finally went home, I carefully placed that hospital wristband in my desk drawer, thinking it was just a reminder of a close call. I never imagined it would become evidence in a fight for my freedom. April 28, 2019. 6 weeks after my surgery, I was finally feeling normal again. The scar on my stomach was healing well, and I was back to working full days at the shop. I was eating breakfast when the knock came at my door. 3 sharp raps, official and demanding. I opened it to find a detective standing on my porch, their faces stone serious. The older one, Detective Johnson, held up a badge and an arrest warrant. "Alex Turner?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" "You're under arrest for armed robbery. You have the right to remain silent." The words hit me like a physical blow. Armed robbery? I stared at the warrant in disbelief, reading my name typed in black letters next to charges I couldn't understand. The world started spinning around me. "There has to be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I've never robbed anyone. I work at Tommy's Auto Repair. I pay my taxes. I save it for your lawyer," Detective Johnson interrupted, pulling out handcuffs. "You're being charged with the armed robbery of Quick Mart on Elm Street. March 15th at 9:30 p.m. March 15th. The date hit me like lightning. Wait, I said desperately. March 15th? I was in the hospital that night. I had surgery. I was unconscious during an appendectomy at Mercy General. The detectives exchanged glances. The younger one, Detective Riley, wrote something in his notebook. "We'll look into that," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe me. As they put the handcuffs on me, I kept talking, my words tumbling out in panic. "Call Dr. Morrison at Mercy General. Check the surgery records. I have the hospital wristband. I was under anesthesia when this robbery happened." "Mr. Turner, you need to stop talking now," Detective Johnson said firmly. "Anything you say can be used against you." My neighbors were coming out of their houses, watching as the police led me to their car. Mrs. Patterson from next door covered, her mouth in shock. I could see the questions in their eyes, the doubt creeping in. If the police arrested him, he must have done something wrong. At the station, they showed me the evidence. Security camera footage from the Quick Mart, grainy and dark, but clear enough to show a man about my height and build. He wore a baseball cap and hoodie, just like ones I owned. The convenience store clerk, a nervous teenager named Billy, had picked my photo out of a lineup. "That's him," Billy had said with certainty. "I'll never forget that face." He pointed a gun right at me. But it wasn't my face, it wasn't me. I was lying on an operating table 12 miles away. My life in the hands of surgeons who were saving me from a burst appendix. The timing was impossible. But how could I prove it? They processed me like any other criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, a cell that smelled like fear and disinfectant. I used my one phone call to contact my mom. But what could I tell her? That the system had made a terrible mistake. That an innocent man was being charged with a crime he couldn't have committed. The first night in holding was the longest of my life. I kept thinking about that hospital wristband in my desk drawer, about Dr. Morrison's gentle hands, about the surgery that saved my life. Somewhere in the hospital's files were records that would prove my innocence. But who would believe me? Who would fight for a man everyone thought was guilty? The prosecution's case against me was like a perfect storm of bad luck and circumstantial evidence. Each piece seemed to point directly at my guilt, building a wall of proof that felt impossible to climb. The centerpiece was that security camera. Screenshot, grainy and dark. It showed a man in a baseball cap and hoodie robbing the Quick Mart at 9:30 p.m. on March 15th. The image was blurry, but the prosecutor, District Attorney Karen Wells, treated it like a high-definition portrait. She would wave it in front of the jury, pointing out how the robber's height and build matched mine exactly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she would say during pretrial hearings, "this is the defendant. Same height, same build, same general appearance. The evidence is clear." But what really worried me was Billy Chen, the convenience store clerk. He was 19, working nights to pay for college, and he was absolutely certain I was the man who robbed him. During the identification lineup, he had pointed at me without hesitation. "That's him," Billy had said, his voice shaking with remembered fear. I looked right into his eyes when he pointed the gun at me. I'll never forget that face. The problem was, Billy seemed like a good kid. Honest, hard-working, scared. When he testified, the jury would see a victim who genuinely believed he was telling the truth. How do you argue against someone's sincere memory, even when that memory is wrong? The physical evidence was circumstantial, but damaging. The robber had worn a red baseball cap and gray hoodie, both items I owned. The police had found them in my closet during their search, along with size 10 sneakers that matched footprints outside the store. Nothing unusual about any of it. Half the men in town probably owned similar clothes. But it all added up in the prosecutor's narrative. Detective Johnson had built his case methodically. He'd interviewed my co-workers, my friends, my family. He checked my finances, looking for a motive. What he found was a young man struggling with medical bills from his appendectomy. Someone who might have been desperate enough to rob a convenience store. Mr. Turner had means, motive, and opportunity, Detective Johnson would later testify. He needed money for his hospital bills. He had no solid alibi for the time of the robbery. And he fit the description perfectly. The most frustrating part was how my own story seemed to fall apart under scrutiny. Yes, I had been in the hospital that night, but could I prove exactly when? My surgery was scheduled for 8:45 p.m., but the robbery happened at 9:30. Could I have somehow left the hospital? Could the surgery have been delayed? Detective Johnson had visited Mercy General, but the records he obtained were incomplete. The hospital's filing system was complicated, and the night shift supervisor he spoke with couldn't immediately locate all the documentation. What he did find showed I had been admitted for appendicitis, but the exact timing of the surgery wasn't clear in the initial reports. Hospital records can be unreliable, D.A. Wells would argue. Admission times, surgery schedules, these things change. What we have here is a defendant who admits to being in the area, who owns clothes matching the robber's description, and who was positively identified by the victim. The surveillance footage had been enhanced by the police department's tech unit, but it only made things worse for me. The enhanced images showed more detail of the robber's face, and the resemblance to me was uncanny. Same facial structure, same approximate age, even the same way of moving. My fingerprints weren't found at the scene, but the prosecutor had an explanation for that too. The robber had worn gloves, she said. The gun was never recovered, but robberies often involved weapons that were quickly disposed of. Every gap in the evidence became proof of how carefully the crime had been planned. The witness testimony was the most damaging part. Billy's identification was backed up by the customers who had been in the store during the robbery. They couldn't identify the robber's face, but they confirmed the height, build, and clothing description. An elderly woman named Mrs. Foster had seen someone matching my description running from the area shortly after the robbery. I saw a young man running down Elm Street, Mrs. Foster would testify. He was wearing a red cap and gray hoodie just like the police described. He looked panicked, like he was running from something. My court-appointed lawyer was Linda Foster, a tired woman in her 50s who carried herself like someone who had seen too much disappointment. Her office was a cramped space, filled with towering stacks of case files, and when she first met with me, she was already juggling 3 other cases that same day. "Mr. Turner," she said, barely looking up from her notes, "I've reviewed your case. The evidence against you is substantial. Have you considered a plea bargain? A plea bargain?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ms. Foster, I didn't do this. I was in surgery when the robbery happened. I was unconscious on an operating table." She finally looked at me, her eyes weary behind thick glasses. "Alex, I've been doing this for 20 years. Hospital records can be complicated. Surgery times get delayed. Unless you have ironclad proof of exactly where you were at 9:30 p.m., your alibi is going to be hard to verify." I leaned forward desperately. "Then let's get that proof. Call Dr. Morrison. Get the complete surgery records. Talk to the anesthesiologist, the operating room staff. Someone has to have documentation of exactly when I was under anesthesia." Ms. Foster scribbled something in her notebook. "I'll make some calls," she said. But her tone suggested this was just another item on an endless to-do list. "In the meantime, the DA is offering a plea deal. Armed robbery typically carries 5 to 10 years. But if you plead guilty to simple robbery, they'll recommend 3 years." "I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do," I said firmly. "There has to be documentation at the hospital. Medical records are detailed. They track everything. Mr. Turner, I have 47 active cases right now. The public defender's office is understaffed and overworked. I'll do what I can, but you need to understand the reality of your situation. The prosecution has security footage, witness identification, and physical evidence that matches you. Your best bet might be to take the deal over the next few weeks." I watched Ms. Foster's half-hearted attempts to build my defense. She made a few phone calls to Mercy General, but each time she was transferred to different departments, put on hold, or told that the records she needed required special authorization. The hospital's bureaucracy seemed designed to frustrate anyone looking for detailed information. "The hospital says they need a court order to release detailed surgical records," she told me during one of our brief meetings. "Getting that will take time, and honestly, the judge might not grant it. Patient privacy laws are strict." I wanted to scream. "It's my surgery. My privacy. Can I authorize the release?" "It's not that simple. The records you're asking for include detailed operating room logs, anesthesia charts, nursing notes. The hospital is being cautious about releasing them, especially in a criminal case." My family tried to help. My mother called the hospital directly, spoke to Dr. Morrison's office, even went in person to speak with the records department. But without legal authority, they couldn't access the detailed documentation we needed. The basic records showed I had been admitted for appendicitis and had surgery, but they didn't include the precise timing that would prove my innocence. Ms. Foster's investigation was minimal. She didn't visit the crime scene, didn't interview witnesses beyond what was required, didn't hire any experts to analyze the surveillance footage. When I asked about these things, she would remind me that the public defender's office had limited resources. "I'm not Perry Mason, Alex," she said during one frustrating meeting. "I'm a public defender with too many cases and not enough time. I'll do my best to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence against you is strong." The plea deal offer kept getting worse as we got closer to trial. First it was 3 years, then 4, then 5. "The DA knows she has a strong case," Ms. Foster explained. "She's less motivated to negotiate as the trial approaches." I kept insisting on my innocence, kept asking her to dig deeper into the hospital records, but Ms. Foster's case file for my defense was painfully thin. A few phone calls to the hospital, a basic review of the prosecution's evidence, and a half-hearted attempt to challenge the witness identification. That was it. "Look, Alex," she said during our last meeting before trial, "I believe you might be telling the truth about being in the hospital, but believing you and proving it in court are 2 different things. The jury is going to see that security footage, hear from Billy Chin, and see the physical evidence. Unless we can produce a smoking gun that proves you were unconscious during The robbery were fighting an uphill battle. The smoking gun was there, sitting in the hospital's files. Detailed surgical records that would show exactly when I went under anesthesia, exactly when the operation began, exactly when I was in recovery. But getting those records required more effort than my overworked public defender could manage. I was going to trial with a lawyer who had already given up on my case. The courthouse felt like a tomb the morning my trial began, built in the 1960s. It was all concrete and narrow windows, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. I sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit, watching potential jurors file into the courtroom. Their faces were blank, curious, already judging me before hearing a word of testimony. Ms. Foster shuffled through her papers nervously. Across the aisle, D.A. Wells looked confident and prepared, her case files organized in perfect stacks. She had 2 assistant prosecutors with her, while I had one overworked public defender who was checking her phone for messages about her other cases. Judge Patricia Hawkins called the court to order. She was a stern woman in her 60s, known for running an efficient courtroom and handing down tough sentences. As she explained the charges to the jury, I felt the weight of her words. Armed robbery in the first degree, a Class A felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. 20 years. More than half my life gone for something I didn't do. D.A. Wells stood for her opening statement, and I could see why she had such a good conviction rate. She was polished, confident, and spoke to the jury like they were old friends. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a young man who made a terrible choice. On March 15, 2019, the defendant Alex Turner walked into the Quick Mart on Elm Street, pointed a gun at 19-year-old Billy Chen, and demanded money from the register. She held up the enhanced surveillance photo, walking it slowly past the jury box. This is the defendant, captured on security camera at 9:30 p.m. Same height, same build, same general appearance. The victim, Billy Chen, looked this man in the eye and positively identified him. To other customers confirmed the description. The evidence is overwhelming. D.A. Wells painted a picture of a desperate young man facing medical bills, someone who chose crime over honest work. She made my financial struggles sound like a motive for armed robbery. My ownership of common clothing sound like criminal preparation. The defendant will claim he was in the hospital that night, she continued. But hospital records are incomplete and surgery schedules change. What we know for certain is that at 9:30 p.m. on March 15th, someone matching the defendant's exact description robbed the Quick Mart. The victim identified him. The camera captured him. The evidence convicts him. When Ms. Foster stood for her opening statement, I could see the jury already leaning away from her. Her voice was shaky, her presentation disorganized. She held up a hospital wristband, my hospital wristband, but somehow it looked less convincing than the prosecutor's evidence. My client was fighting for his life on March 15th, she said. He was in surgery at Mercy General Hospital, unconscious and under anesthesia. The real robber is still out there, and an innocent man is sitting in that chair because of a tragic case of mistaken identity. But she couldn't prove it, without the detailed medical records, without testimony from the surgical team, without precise timing documentation. Her defense sounded like a desperate story. The jury's faces showed skepticism, doubt, the assumption that everyone claims to be innocent. The prosecution's first witness was Billy Chen, and he was devastating, clean-cut, articulate, and genuinely traumatized. He described the robbery with vivid detail. The man walked in around 9:25, browsed the aisles for a few minutes, then approached the counter. He seemed nervous, fidgety. Then he pulled out a gun and pointed it right at me. Billy's voice shook as he continued. I'll never forget his face. He looked directly at me, and I thought I was going to die. When the police showed me the photo lineup, I recognized him immediately. That's him sitting right there. Billy pointed at me with absolute certainty. The jury followed his finger, studying my face, comparing it to their memory of the surveillance photo. I wanted to stand up and shout that I was innocent, that I was unconscious in surgery when this happened. But all I could do was sit there while this good kid destroyed my life with his honest mistake. D.A. Wells walked Billy through the identification process, showing how carefully the police had conducted the lineup, how certain Billy was of his choice. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that Alex Turner is the man who robbed you? 10, Billy said without hesitation. Absolutely 10. I looked right into his eyes. I'll never forget that face. The other witnesses were equally damaging. Mrs. Foster, the elderly woman, who had seen someone running from the area, described a young man in a red cap and gray hoodie. Her description matched me perfectly, and she pointed me out in the courtroom with the same certainty as Billy. During my family's testimony, I could see the jury's sympathy for them, but also their skepticism. My mother cried as she described rushing to the hospital, how worried she was about my appendicitis, how she stayed by my bedside. But when DA Wells cross-examined her, she had to admit she didn't know the exact timing of my surgery. Couldn't confirm I was unconscious at 9:30 p.m. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, recording every word that was sealing. My fate, each testimony, each piece of evidence, each moment of doubt was being preserved in the official record. The transcript would show a case built on strong evidence and witness testimony, not the truth of an innocent man being railroaded by circumstance. The witness stand felt like an electric chair as I sat down and placed my hand on the Bible. The court reporter adjusted her machine. Judge Hawkins looked at me with neutral eyes, and 12 jurors stared at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The microphone in front of me seemed to amplify every breath, every nervous swallow. Ms. Foster began with basic questions, trying to establish my character and background. I told the jury about my job at the auto repair shop, my clean record, my normal life before this nightmare began. But I could see in their faces that they were waiting for the real story, the explanation for why I was sitting in the defendant's chair. Alex, can you tell the jury where you were on the evening of March 15, 2019? I took a deep breath. I was at Mercy General Hospital. I had emergency surgery for appendicitis. I was unconscious on the operating table when this robbery happened. What time did your surgery begin? It was scheduled for 8:45 p.m. Dr. Morrison, my surgeon, said my appendix was ready to burst. They had to operate immediately. Ms. Foster had me describe the pain, the rush to the hospital, the medical team that saved my life. I held up my hospital wristband, showing the jury the admission time, 7:23 p.m., but I could see their skepticism. Scheduled times and actual times could be different. Emergency surgery schedules could change. Alex, do you own a red baseball cap and gray hoodie like the ones worn by the robber? I had to answer honestly. Yes, I do. They're common clothes. Lots of people own similar items. Have you ever been to the Quick Mart on Elm Street? Yes, I've shopped there before. It's in my neighborhood. Each honest answer seemed to hurt my case. Yes, I live near the store. Yes, I own clothes like the robbers. Yes, I had financial pressures from medical bills. Every truth played into the prosecution's narrative. Then DA Wells stood up for cross-examination, and I knew I was in trouble. She was skilled, aggressive, and clearly believed I was guilty. She circled me like a predator, her questions designed to trap me in contradictions. Mr. Turner, you claim you were in surgery at 9:30 p.m., but do you have any proof of that exact timing? The hospital has records. I'm asking what you personally remember. Do you remember being wheeled into the operating room at exactly 8:45 p.m.? I hesitated. I remember the preparation, the anesthesia, but when you're going under, time gets blurry. So you don't actually know when your surgery began? I know it was scheduled for 8:45, but schedules change, don't they? Emergency surgeries get delayed all the time. DA Wells was dismantling my alibi piece by piece. She pointed out that I couldn't prove exactly when I went under anesthesia. Couldn't prove I was unconscious at 9:30 p.m. Couldn't explain why the hospital's initial records were incomplete. Mr. Turner, you were facing significant medical bills after your surgery, weren't you? Yes. But in fact, you were struggling financially, working extra hours to pay for your medical care. I was managing my bills responsibly. Is it true that you asked your employer for an advance on your paycheck to cover hospital expenses? My heart sank. Yes, but that doesn't mean I would rob someone. You were desperate for money, weren't you? I wasn't desperate enough to commit a crime, but the jury was hearing a different story. They were hearing about a young man under financial pressure, someone who needed money badly enough to ask for salary advances. Combined with the physical evidence and witness testimony, it painted a picture of motive. DA Wells held up the surveillance photo. Mr. Turner, isn't it true that this looks exactly like you? I stared at the blurry image. It looks like it could be a lot of people, but specifically, doesn't it look like you? There's a resemblance, but it's not me. The victim, Billy Chen, looked you in the eye and identified you as the robber. Are you saying he's lying? I'm saying he's mistaken. People make mistakes in stressful situations. Billy Chen seemed pretty certain to me. Are you calling him a liar? No. I'm saying he's wrong. I was unconscious in surgery when this happened, but I couldn't prove it. Without the detailed medical records, without testimony from the surgical team, without precise documentation of the anesthesia timing, my alibi sounded like a convenient story. The jury watched me struggle with DA Wells' questions, saw my inability to provide concrete proof. The worst moment came when she asked about my behavior after the arrest. Mr. Turner, when Detective Johnson arrested you, you immediately claimed to be in the hospital. Isn't that the kind of alibi someone would create after being caught? No, it's the truth. I told them to check the hospital records. But you didn't have those records with you, did you? You couldn't prove your story on the spot. I had my hospital wristband at home. I told them to verify it. A wristband that shows admission time, not surgery time. A wristband that doesn't prove you were unconscious at 9:30 p.m. I felt like I was drowning. Every answer I gave seemed to make me look more guilty. The microphone amplified my nervous breathing, my stumbling words, my inability to provide the ironclad proof that would set me free. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I could see the verdict in the jury's faces. They had heard. A young man who couldn't prove his innocence, who owned clothes like the robbers, who had financial motives for the crime. They had seen me struggle under cross-examination, unable to provide the concrete evidence that would clear me. That microphone had broadcast my desperation, my fear, my inability to save myself. And somewhere in the courthouse files, the official record would show a defendant whose testimony failed to convince 12 of his peers. The jury deliberated for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the courtroom wall, counting every second while my fate was decided in a room down the hall. Ms. Foster tried to reassure me that a quick verdict could go either way, but her nervous energy betrayed her real feelings. Sometimes juries decide quickly when the evidence is overwhelming, she said, then immediately tried to backtrack. But that could mean overwhelming in your favor too. We both knew she was lying. 3 hours wasn't long enough to carefully consider the evidence, to debate the nuances of witness testimony, to wrestle with reasonable doubt. 3 hours meant they had looked at the surveillance photo, listened to Billy Chen's identification, and made up their minds. My family filled the gallery. Behind me, my mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in grim determination. My sister held my mother's hand, whispering prayers under her breath. When the bailiff announced the jury was returning, the courtroom fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding. 12 men and women filed back into the jury box, their faces carefully neutral. None of them looked at me, which Ms. Foster had warned me was a bad sign. Have you reached a verdict? Judge Hawkins asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man in a brown suit, stood up. He held a folded piece of paper in his hands, the document that would determine the next chapter of my life. We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict to the bailiff. I watched that piece of paper travel from the foreman to the bailiff to the judge. Judge Hawkins unfolded it, read it silently, then handed it back to the bailiff. Her expression revealed nothing. Will the defendant please rise? I stood on shaking legs, Ms. Foster beside me. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. Behind me, I could hear my mother's labored breathing, my father's whispered prayer. Mr. Foreman, please read the verdict. The foreman cleared his throat. In the case of the state versus Alex Turner, on the charge of armed robbery in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant. The pause lasted forever. In that moment, I thought about Dr. Morrison's gentle hands, about the hospital wristband in my desk drawer, about the detailed medical records that could have saved me if anyone had fought hard enough to find them. Guilty. The word hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees buckle, heard my mother's sharp intake of breath behind me. The courtroom erupted in whispers and shuffling as the reality sank in. I was going to prison for something I didn't do. Judge Hawkins banged her gavel. Order in the court. The foreman continued reading. We the jury find the defendant guilty of armed robbery in the first degree as charged. I turned to look at my family. My mother was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. My sister was holding both of them, her own eyes filled with tears. Billy Chen sat in the gallery with his family, looking relieved but not triumphant. He genuinely believed justice had been served, that the man who traumatized him was finally going to pay for his crime. I couldn't even be angry at him. He was just a kid who had been through something terrible and was trying to make sense of it. Da Wells looked satisfied with her victory. She had successfully convicted another criminal, protected the community from a dangerous individual, and maintained her impressive conviction rate. In her mind, the system had worked perfectly. Mr. Turner, Judge Hawkins said, you have been found guilty of armed robbery in the first degree. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, you will be held without bail. The bailiff approached with handcuffs. As he put them on my wrist, I looked back at my family one more time. My mother mouthed, I love you, and my father nodded with grim determination. They would keep fighting, keep believing in my innocence. Even when the legal system had failed me, The guilty verdict form would be filed away in the court records, official documentation of my conviction. But that form was wrong. It represented a failure of the system, a triumph of circumstantial evidence over truth, a victory for appearances over reality. As they led me away, I caught sight of the court stenographer packing up her machine. She had faithfully recorded every word of my trial, every piece of testimony that convicted an innocent man. The transcript would become part of the official record, a permanent document of injustice disguised as justice. In the holding cell, I sat alone with the weight of that guilty verdict pressing down on me. Somewhere in Mercy General Hospital, detailed medical records sat in a filing cabinet, proof that I had been unconscious during the robbery. But those records might as well have been on the moon for all the good they did me now. The system had spoken. Alex Turner was guilty of armed robbery. The fact that Alex Turner was innocent was apparently irrelevant. Riverside Correctional Facility looked like something from a nightmare. Gray concrete walls topped with razor wire, guard towers at each corner, and the constant sound of metal doors slamming shut. When the transport van pulled through the gates, I felt the last of my hope die. This would be my home for the next 5 years. Processing was designed to strip away every piece of your identity. They took my clothes, my personal items, even my hospital wristband that I had managed to keep through the trial. Everything that made me Alex Turner was replaced with orange prison clothes and a number, 47,191. My cellmate was Tommy Rodriguez, a lifer who had been inside for 15 years. He was a big man with graying hair and tired eyes, serving time for armed robbery that he actually committed. When I told him my story, he listened without judgment. Innocent guys come through here sometimes, Tommy said, sitting on his narrow bunk. Usually they don't last long. Prison eats them alive if they don't learn to adapt. Tommy taught me the unwritten rules that kept you alive inside. Don't stare at other inmates. Mind your own business. Find a group that will protect you. Never show weakness. Most importantly, never stop fighting for your freedom, even when everyone else gives up on you. The moment you accept this place as your home, Tommy said, you're really finished. Keep believing in your innocence, but learn to survive while you fight. The days blended together in a monotonous routine. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of a buzzer. Stand for count while guards verified every prisoner was present. Breakfast in the cafeteria, where conversations were whispered and eyes constantly scanned for trouble. Work detail in the prison laundry, 8 hours of mindless labor. For 12 cents an hour, I used every free moment to work on my case. The prison law library was a cramped room with outdated books and a single computer. That worked half the time. I wrote letters to every lawyer I could find explaining my situation, begging someone to take my case. Most never responded. The few who did wanted money I didn't have. Dear Mr. Turner, one letter read, while your case sounds compelling, our firm requires a $50,000 retainer for criminal appeals. We wish you the best of luck in finding representation. The appeals process was a maze of deadlines and forms that seemed designed to discourage inmates from pursuing their cases. I had 90 days to file a notice of appeal, then months to prepare briefs that had to follow exact formatting rules. One small mistake could get your entire appeal thrown out. Ms. Foster filed the required paperwork, but her heart wasn't in it. She was already moving on to other cases, other clients who needed her limited time and attention. My appeal brief was thin, rehashing the same arguments that had failed at trial. Tommy helped me understand the system better than any lawyer ever had. The courts don't want to admit they made mistakes, he explained. Overturning convictions makes judges look bad, makes prosecutors look incompetent. You need new evidence, something they can't ignore. But what new evidence could I find from inside a prison cell? I wrote letters to Dr. Morrison, to the anesthesiologist, to anyone at Mercy General who might remember my surgery. Most letters went unanswered. The hospital's legal department sent form responses about patient privacy and the proper procedures for requesting medical records. The worst part was the slow erosion of support from the outside world. Friends stopped visiting after a few months. My girlfriend broke up with me in a tear-filled conversation through bulletproof glass. I believe you're innocent, she said, but I can't wait 5 years for you to prove it. My family never gave up, but I could see the strain wearing on them. My mother aged years and months, stress lines deepening around her eyes. My father worked extra shifts to pay for collect calls from prison and to put money in my commissary account. They visited every week, but what could we talk about? My life had stopped. While theirs had to continue, prison had its own ecosystem of violence and survival. I witnessed fights over respect, over territory, over debts that could never be repaid. I saw men broken by the system, their humanity slowly ground away by years of dehumanizing treatment. I watched others find ways to maintain their dignity, to build small communities of support within the walls. The cell block key that unlocked my door each morning became a symbol of everything I had lost. Freedom, dignity, the presumption of innocence, the belief that truth mattered. Every time I heard that key turn, I was reminded that I was now property of the state, a number in a system that had no interest in admitting its mistakes. At night, lying on my thin mattress, I would stare at the ceiling and remember Dr. Morrison's voice explaining my surgery. The feeling of anesthesia taking hold, the recovery room where I woke up safe and grateful. That hospital experience had saved my life once. Somehow, I had to believe it would save me again. Tommy often found me writing letters in the dim light of our cell. "What keeps you going?" he asked one night. "The truth," I said. "Somewhere in those hospital files is proof that I'm innocent. Someone just has to care enough to find it." The rejection letter from the appeals court arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the same casual indifference as any other piece of mail. I opened it in my cell while Tommy watched from his bunk, already knowing from my expression what it contained. "The court finds no merit in appellant's claims of insufficient evidence or inadequate representation." And I read aloud, "The conviction is affirmed, appeal denied." Tommy shook his head. "Third one, right? Third one." I crumpled the letter and threw it against the wall. 3 appeals, 3 rejections. 3 official confirmations that the system didn't care about my innocence. I was running out of legal options and slowly running out of hope. The letter represented more than just another legal defeat. It was a door slamming shut, another path to freedom being blocked by bureaucracy and indifference. I had spent 2 years in prison writing briefs, researching cases, filing motions that were dismissed without serious consideration. That afternoon in the prison yard, the breaking point finally came. I was walking the perimeter, trying to clear my head, when Marcus Williams approached me. Marcus was a gang leader who controlled part of the drug trade inside Riverside. A dangerous man who enjoyed intimidating other inmates. "Turner," he called out, stepping into my path with 2 of his followers. "You still claiming you're innocent?" I tried to walk around him, but he moved to block me. "Everyone in here is innocent, right? But you actually believe your own lies. Leave me alone." "Marcus, or what? You'll call your lawyer." He laughed, and his crew joined in. "Oh wait, you don't have a lawyer anymore. Nobody believes your sob story." Something inside me snapped. 2 years of frustration, of watching guilty men laugh while I rotted for a crime I didn't commit, of being treated like a liar by everyone including the courts. I swung at Marcus without warning, catching him in the jaw. The fight was brutal and one-sided. Marcus was bigger, stronger, and had been fighting in prison for years. His crew held back other inmates while he beat me systematically, methodically, sending a message to anyone who might challenge his authority. I ended up in the prison infirmary with a broken nose, cracked ribs, and a concussion that left me dizzy for days. The medical staff treated my injuries with professional detachment. Just another inmate who had learned a hard lesson about prison hierarchy. "You're lucky he didn't kill you," the nurse said, while cleaning blood from my face. "Marcus Williams has put 3 men in the hospital this year. You must have really made him angry." Lying in that infirmary bed, staring at the ceiling through swollen eyes, I felt closer to giving up than ever before. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. 3 rejected appeals, no lawyer, no hope. And now I was marked as a target by one of the most dangerous inmates in the facility. Tommy visited me in the infirmary, bringing commissary snacks and words of rough wisdom. "Marcus is telling everyone. You started the fight," he said. "Guards are talking about putting you in solitary." "Maybe that's where I belong," I said through split lips. "Maybe I should just accept this and stop fighting." Tommy grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly gentle for such a strong man. "Don't you dare give up now. I've seen strong men breaking. Here, good men who let this place destroy them. You're not one of them." "I can't take much more of this, Tommy. The appeals are done. Nobody believes me. I'm going to die in here for something I didn't do." "Listen to me," Tommy said, his voice intense. "I've been in here 15 years. I've seen innocent men give up and become exactly what the system says they are. I've also seen them find ways to prove their innocence when everyone else quit believing. You don't get to give up because some punk knocked you around." The rejection letter sat on my cell desk when I returned, a constant reminder of the system's indifference. But Tommy was right. Giving up meant letting the real robber walk free, meant accepting that truth didn't matter, meant betraying the family who still believed in me. That night, I started writing letters again. Not to appeals courts or expensive lawyers, but to journalism schools, law schools, Innocence projects. Somewhere out there was someone who still believed that truth mattered. Someone who would care enough to dig deeper than my overworked public defender ever had. "What are you writing?" Tommy asked, watching me work by the dim light of our cell. "A letter to the Northwestern University Law School," I said. "They have a clinic that works on wrongful conviction cases. It's a long shot, but long shots are all we got in here," Tommy said. "Keep writing." The appeal rejection letter would go into my case file as more official documentation of my guilt. But sitting next to it was a growing stack of new letters, reaching out to anyone who might listen, anyone who might care that an innocent man was slowly dying in a place designed for the guilty. I wouldn't let Marcus Williams or the appeals court, or anyone else convince me to stop fighting. The truth was still out there, waiting in a hospital filing cabinet. I just had to find someone who cared enough to look for it. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in November, almost 6 months after my fight with Marcus Williams. I had been in prison for 2.5 years, and hope had become something I rationed carefully, afraid to waste it on false promises. The envelope was different from the usual legal correspondence. Clean white paper, university letterhead, addressed to me personally rather than generically. I opened it carefully, not daring to expect anything more than another polite rejection. "Dear Mr. Turner," the letter began. "My name is Lisa Chen, and I am a third-year law student at Northwestern University. Your letter to our wrongful conviction clinic has been forwarded to me as part of my clinical work. After reviewing your case summary, I would like to visit you to discuss your situation in more detail." I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Someone was actually interested in my case. Someone with legal training. Someone connected to an organization that specialized in exactly what I needed. Tommy watched me from his bunk as I held the letter with shaking hands. "Good news?" he asked. "Maybe. A law student wants to meet with me. She's with something called the Wrongful Conviction Clinic." Tommy sat up, suddenly interested. "Northwestern. I've heard of them. They've gotten people out of here before. Real lawyers, not the public defenders who don't have time to care." Lisa Chen arrived the following week. She was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with serious dark eyes and a briefcase filled with files and notebooks. When she sat across from me in the visiting room, I could see intelligence and determination in her expression. "Mr. Turner, I've read your trial transcript and the appeals you filed," she said, pulling out a thick folder. "Your case has some interesting elements that suggest a possible wrongful conviction. You believe I might be innocent. I believe your case deserves a thorough investigation that it hasn't received yet. The medical alibi you claim is compelling, but it was never properly developed by your defense team." Lisa explained how the wrongful conviction clinic worked. Law students, supervised by experienced attorneys, took on cases where there was evidence of possible innocence. They had resources that individual inmates could never access: investigators, expert witnesses, the ability to subpoena records and interview witnesses. "We're not miracle workers," Lisa cautioned. "Most of our investigations don't result in exonerations. But when we find credible evidence of innocence, we fight with everything we have." She asked detailed questions about the night of my surgery, about the hospital, about the medical team that treated me. I told her everything I could remember: Dr. Morrison's name, the approximate timing, the recovery process, the bills I received. "Afterward, the key is going to be the detailed medical records," Lisa said, taking notes. "Surgery schedules, anesthesia logs, nursing notes, recovery room documentation. If we can prove exactly when you went under anesthesia and when you woke up, we can establish a timeline. That makes the robbery impossible." My public defender tried to get those records. Tried and failed because she didn't have the resources or expertise to navigate hospital bureaucracy. We have investigators who know how to find documentation that others miss. For the first time in years, I felt genuine hope stirring in my chest. This wasn't another overworked public defender or an expensive lawyer looking for money. This was someone who chose to work on wrongful conviction cases. Someone who understood that innocent people sometimes ended up in prison. Lisa explained the process ahead. First, they would formally accept my case, which required approval from the clinic's supervising attorneys. Then they would begin a comprehensive investigation, starting with the medical records that should prove my innocence. "How long does this usually take?" I asked. "It varies. Some cases we resolve in months. Others take years. The important thing is that we don't give up. If you're innocent, Mr. Turner, we'll find the evidence to prove it." She handed me her business card, a simple white rectangle that represented more hope than I have felt since my arrest. "Northwestern University School of Law," it read. "Wrongful Conviction Clinic." Below that, her name and phone number. When Lisa left that day, I sat in the visiting room for several minutes, just holding her business card. Other inmates and their visitors moved around me, but I was lost in the possibility that someone finally believed my story enough to investigate it properly. Tommy was waiting when I returned to our cell. How did it go? She's going to try to help me. They have resources, investigators, people who know how to find evidence. You sound like you believe her. I have to believe her. Tommy, she's the first person with legal training who's listened to my story and thought it was worth investigating. That night, I lay on my bunk thinking about Lisa's questions, about the detailed timeline she wanted to establish, about the medical records that had been sitting in some hospital filing cabinet. For years, somewhere in those files was proof of my innocence, documentation that would set me free. The business cards sat on my desk, a small white lifeline in the gray world of prison. For the first time since my conviction, I allowed myself to imagine walking out of Riverside Correctional Facility as a free man, vindicated and cleared of all charges. Tommy was right to be cautious about hope in prison, but sometimes hope was all that kept you human in a place designed to strip away your humanity. Lisa Chen and the wrongful conviction clinic represented the possibility that truth could still matter, that justice could still prevail, that an innocent man didn't have to die in prison for someone else's crime. Lisa's investigation began with a phone call to Mercy General Hospital that went nowhere fast. The hospital's legal department cited patient privacy laws, despite the fact that I had signed releases authorizing the disclosure of my medical records. The records my public defender had obtained were basic admission and discharge summaries, not the detailed surgical documentation we needed. Hospital bureaucracy is designed to protect them from liability, Lisa explained during her second visit. They're especially careful about releasing detailed records in criminal cases, but we have ways to work around their reluctance. She had brought a thick directory with her, hundreds of pages listing every department, administrator, and staff member at Mercy General. This wasn't the basic phone book approach my public defender had used. This was a roadmap to finding the right person who could help us. Medical records departments are just the first line of defense, Lisa said, flipping through the directory. The real documentation we need is probably scattered across multiple departments: surgery, anesthesia, recovery, nursing. Each department keeps its own records. Her approach was methodical and professional. She started by identifying every person who would have been involved in my surgery. The surgical team, anesthesia staff, recovery room nurses, even the orderlies, who would have transported me between departments. Each person represented a potential source of documentation. Double quotes, Dr. Morrison is obviously key, Lisa said, making notes, but the anesthesiologist might be even more important. They keep detailed logs of exactly when patients go under, drug dosages, vital signs throughout the procedure. If we can find those records, we'll have minute-by-minute documentation of your unconscious state. The first breakthrough came when Lisa contacted the surgery department directly, bypassing the legal department altogether. She spoke with the surgery coordinator, a nurse named Patricia Walsh who had worked at Mercy General for 20 years. Ms. Walsh remembers the night shift on March 15th, Lisa reported excitedly. She said emergency appendectomies are memorable because of the urgency involved. She's willing to help us locate the specific records for your case, but finding the records proved more complicated than anyone expected. Hospital filing systems had changed several times since 2019. Paper records had been digitized. Old systems had been replaced with new ones, and some documentation had been archived to off-site storage facilities. It's like an archaeological dig, Lisa said with frustration after spending a week navigating hospital systems. Different types of records are stored in different places, some digital, some physical, some on backup systems that require special access. The hospital administration directory became Lisa's Bible. As she worked her way through the maze of departments and personnel, she contacted the anesthesia department, the nursing supervisors, the medical records archivist, anyone who might have access to the detailed documentation we needed. Your surgery happened during a shift change, Lisa discovered. The evening anesthesiologist, Dr. James Morrison, no relation to your surgeon, worked until midnight. He would have been responsible for your anesthesia throughout the procedure. Dr. Morrison, the anesthesiologist, was still working at Mercy General when Lisa finally reached him. He remembered the case. Emergency appendectomies are routine, he told her, but I remember this one because the patient was so young and healthy. The surgery went smoothly. Textbook procedure. You remember the timing? Generally, yes. We started the anesthesia around 8:45. Surgery began maybe 15 minutes later. The patient was under for about 4 hours total. I have detailed logs somewhere. I keep meticulous records for liability reasons. This was exactly what we needed. Dr. Morrison's anesthesia logs would show minute-by-minute documentation of when I went under, how long I remained unconscious, and when I began to wake up. If those records showed I was under anesthesia at 9:30 p.m., the time of the robbery, my innocence would be proven beyond any doubt. But accessing those records required more bureaucratic navigation. Dr. Morrison's personal files were stored in the anesthesia department's archives, which had been moved to an off-site facility in 2021. The archive facility required specific authorization from hospital administration, which brought us back to the legal department that had been stonewalling us. "We're going in circles," Lisa said with frustration. "Everyone wants to help, but they're all afraid of liability issues. The legal department is treating this like we're trying to file a malpractice lawsuit." The solution came from an unexpected source. Patricia Walsh, the surgery coordinator who had been helpful from the beginning, suggested a different approach. Instead of trying to access archived records through official channels, she could check if any of the original documentation was still on file in the surgery department. "Sometimes we keep backup copies of complicated cases," she explained. "Emergency surgeries especially, because they involve multiple departments and there's always the possibility of complications or questions later." Lisa spent an entire day at the hospital with Patricia, going through filing cabinets and storage rooms that hadn't been thoroughly searched before. They found nursing notes, pre-op checklist, post-operative reports, but not the detailed anesthesia logs that would prove my innocence conclusively. "We're close," Lisa said during her weekly visit. "We have documentation showing you were admitted for emergency surgery. Prep work beginning around 8:30 p.m. and recovery room admission at 1:15 a.m. But we need those anesthesia logs to prove exact timing." The hospital administration directory had become our treasure map, marked with notes and contact information for dozens of people who might hold pieces of the puzzle. Each contact brought us closer to the truth, but also revealed new obstacles and complications. "I won't give up," Lisa promised. "Those records exist somewhere. Dr. Morrison is sure he kept detailed logs, and Patricia thinks there might be backup copies in departments we haven't checked yet. We're going to find the proof you need." Looking at that directory with its hundreds of names and departments, I realized how lucky I was to have someone like Lisa fighting for me. My public defender had made a few phone calls and given up. Lisa was treating this like a complex investigation, using every resource at her disposal to find the truth. The roadmap to my freedom was hidden somewhere in the bureaucratic maze of Mercy General Hospital. But with Lisa's determination and methodical approach, I finally believed we would find it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 3 years after my surgery. I was mopping floors in the prison laundry when a guard told me I had a legal call. Lisa's voice was shaking with excitement when I picked up the phone. "Alex, we found them. We found the complete surgical records." I had to sit down, my legs suddenly weak. "All of them, everything. Dr. Morrison's anesthesia logs, nursing notes, surgical timeline, recovery documentation. Alex, you were unconscious from 9:15 p.m. until after midnight. The robbery happened at 9:30 p.m. You couldn't have been there for 3 years." I had imagined this moment. I dreamed of the phone call that would change everything, the discovery that would prove my innocence. But now that it was happening, I felt overwhelmed, almost unable to process what Lisa was telling me. "How did you find them?" Patricia Walsh remembered. "That complicated surgeries sometimes get their records stored in multiple places for teaching purposes." She checked with the medical education department, and they had complete files on your case because emergency appendectomies are used for training residents. The surgery schedule for March 15, 2019, was like a roadmap of my innocence. It showed every detail of that night. Admission at 7:23 p.m., prep beginning at 8:30 p.m., anesthesia starting at 9:15 p.m., surgery beginning at 9:30 p.m., completion at 12:45 a.m., and transfer to recovery at 1:15 a.m. "Alex, listen to this," Lisa said, reading from the documents. "Anesthesia log, March 15, 2019, patient Turner. Alex, 9:15 p.m., anesthesia induction begun. 9:18 p.m., patient fully unconscious. 9:30 p.m., vital signs stable. Patient in deep surgical anesthesia, surgery in progress." At 9:30 p.m., when Billy Chen was being robbed at the Quick Mart 12 miles away, I was lying unconscious on an operating table with Dr. Morrison monitoring my vital signs. The anesthesia log showed minute-by-minute documentation that made it physically impossible for me to have committed the crime. "There's more," Lisa continued. "The nursing notes show continuous monitoring throughout the procedure. The recovery room documentation shows you were brought in unconscious at 1:15 a.m. and didn't fully wake up until after 2 a.m. Alex, we have ironclad proof that you're innocent. I started crying right there in the prison phone booth. 3 years of pain and frustration pouring out in tears of relief and vindication. Other inmates looked at me strangely, but I didn't care. The truth had finally been found. What happens now? I asked when I could speak again. Now we file a motion for post-conviction relief. We're going to present this evidence to the court and demand your immediate release. The prosecution won't be able to argue against this. It's medical documentation that proves your innocence beyond any doubt. Dr. Morrison's anesthesia logs were incredibly detailed. Every drug administered, every vital sign recorded, every moment of the 4-hour procedure documented with medical precision. The log for 9:30 p.m. read, patient stable, blood pressure 120/80ths, heart rate 65, respiration 16, deep anesthesia maintained. No complications, surgery proceeding normally. While the real robber was pointing a gun at Billy Chen, I was unconscious under general anesthesia. My vital signs being monitored by medical professionals who were saving my life. The two events were happening simultaneously, 12 miles apart, making it impossible for me to be in both places. Lisa, how did my public defender miss this? She made a few phone calls to the main records department and gave up when they said the detailed records weren't immediately available. She didn't understand that hospitals store different types of records in different departments. She didn't know to check surgery, anesthesia, nursing, and medical education separately. The documents were stored in the medical education department because my case had been used to train surgical residents. Emergency appendectomies were valuable teaching cases, and the complete documentation had been preserved for educational purposes. It was sitting there the entire time, waiting for someone who knew where to look. The surgery schedule is the smoking gun, Lisa explained. It shows not just that you had surgery that night, but the exact timing that makes the robbery impossible. Combined with Dr. Morrison's anesthesia logs and the nursing documentation, we have 3 independent sources confirming you were unconscious during the crime. I thought about my trial, about DA Wells confidently telling the jury that hospital records were unreliable, that surgery schedules change, that my alibi couldn't be verified. She had been wrong, but she had been convincing enough to send an innocent man to prison. When do we file the motion? I'm working on it now. My supervising attorney, Professor Williams, is reviewing everything to make sure it's bulletproof. We should be able to file within 2 weeks. Tommy was waiting when I returned to my cell, reading the expression on my face. Good news, they found the medical records. Complete documentation proving I was unconscious during the robbery. Tommy smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen from him in years. I told you not to give up. I told you the truth would come out eventually. 3 years, Tommy. 3 years of my life because nobody looked hard enough for the evidence. But they found it. That's what matters now. That night, I lay on my bunk thinking about the surgery schedule sitting in some law office. Physical proof of my innocence typed in black and white. March 15, 2019. 9:30 p.m., patient under deep anesthesia, surgery in progress. It was the most beautiful document I had never seen, the key to my freedom. The vindication I had dreamed of for 3 years. The proof had been there all along, waiting in a filing cabinet in the medical education department. All it took was someone who cared enough to look in the right places. Someone who understood that the truth was worth fighting for. Tomorrow, Lisa would continue preparing the legal motion. That would set me free. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep knowing that my innocence could finally be proven. Dr. Morrison was the first to agree to testify. When Lisa contacted her about the newly discovered medical records, she was appalled to learn that an innocent man had been convicted, while the proof of his innocence sat in hospital files. Of course, I'll testify, Dr. Morrison told Lisa over the phone. I remember that surgery clearly. The patient was a healthy young man with acute appendicitis. The timing of the procedure is well documented in my surgical notes. Lisa was building more than just a legal case. She was constructing an unshakable foundation of medical evidence that would make my innocence impossible to deny. Each doctor, each nurse, each piece of documentation added another layer of proof. Dr. James Morrison, the anesthesiologist, was equally willing to help. His anesthesia logs were meticulously detailed, showing not just when I went under, but the specific drugs used, the dosages administered, and the continuous monitoring throughout the procedure. Anesthesia records are legal documents, Dr. Morrison explained to Lisa. They're created in real time during surgery for medical and liability purposes. They can't be altered or fabricated after the fact. These logs prove beyond any medical doubt that the patient was unconscious and under my care during the time in question. Lisa worked with her supervising attorney, Professor Williams, to prepare medical expert affidavits that would make the evidence crystal clear for the court. They needed to explain not just what the records showed, but why they were reliable and impossible to dispute. Medical documentation in an operating room is created by multiple people simultaneously. Professor Williams explained. The surgeon takes notes, the anesthesiologist keeps logs, nurses document vital signs, and recovery staff track the patient's condition. It's impossible to falsify this kind of coordinated documentation. The medical expert's affidavit was a powerful document that walked through every aspect of my surgery and explained why the timing made the robbery impossible. Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected anesthesiologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, reviewed all the records and provided professional testimony about their reliability. Based on my review of the complete medical records, Dr. Chen wrote in her affidavit, Alex Turner was under general anesthesia and unconscious from 9:15 p.m. until after midnight. On March 15, 2019, the anesthesia logs show continuous monitoring and deep sedation throughout this period. It would have been medically impossible for Mr. Turner to have been conscious or mobile at 9:30 p.m. When the robbery occurred, Lisa also secured affidavits from the nursing staff who had cared for me. That night, Patricia Walsh, the surgery coordinator, provided detailed testimony about the hospital's record-keeping procedures and how the documents had been preserved in the medical education department. Emergency surgeries like appendectomies are well documented because they involve multiple departments and staff members, Patricia wrote. The records from Mr. Turner's case are complete and authentic, showing continuous care from admission through recovery. The most powerful piece of evidence was Dr. Morrison's personal surgical log, a handwritten document he kept separate from the hospital's official records. His notes showed not just the medical details of the surgery, but his personal observations about the case. Patient Turner, Alex, age 29, emergency appendectomy, appendix near rupture. Dr. Morrison had written, surgery successful, no complications, patient stable throughout procedure. Excellent outcome for young man who could have died without immediate intervention. Lisa's enthusiasm was infectious as she described the strength of our case. Alex, this isn't just reasonable doubt, this is absolute proof of innocence. We have 3 independent medical professionals willing to testify, documented evidence from multiple sources, an expert analysis confirming the reliability of the records. But building the case required more than just medical evidence. Lisa also worked to address the prosecution's original arguments about why my alibi had seemed unreliable during the trial. We need to show not just that you were innocent, but why. The jury convicted you despite your claims about being in surgery, she explained. The prosecution will argue that if this evidence was so clear, why wasn't it found during the original trial? Professor Williams helped prepare responses to the likely prosecutorial arguments. They documented how my public defender's investigation had been inadequate, how the hospital's complex filing system had made the records difficult to locate, and how the medical education department's files had been overlooked. During the original investigation, Ms. Foster made basic inquiries to the main records department. Professor Williams noted in our legal brief, she lacked the resources and expertise to conduct the comprehensive investigation that uncovered these records. The failure to find this evidence during the original trial represents inadequate assistance of counsel, not the absence of proof. The medical expert affidavit became the centerpiece of our motion for post-conviction relief. Dr. Chen's professional analysis made it impossible for anyone to argue that the medical evidence was unreliable or inconclusive. The anesthesia records show that Mr. Turner received propofol induction at 9:15 p.m., followed by sevoflurane maintenance anesthesia. Dr. Chen's affidavit detailed. These medications render patients completely unconscious within minutes and maintain deep sedation throughout surgical procedures. The documented vital signs and drug administration logs confirm continuous unconsciousness from 9:15 p.m. until well after midnight. Lisa spent weeks perfecting every aspect of our legal filing. She wanted to present evidence so overwhelming that the court would have no choice but to order my immediate release. Each affidavit was carefully crafted, each medical record properly authenticated, each legal argument supported by precedent and statute. We're not just asking the court to consider new evidence, Lisa explained. We're proving that a fundamental miscarriage of justice occurred when an innocent man was convicted based on incomplete information. The final piece was testimony from the hospital's records administrator, confirming that the medical education department's files were authentic and had been properly maintained since 2019. This eliminated any possibility that the prosecution could argue the records had been tampered with or created after the fact. As Lisa prepared to file our motion, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. After 3 years in prison, the possibility of freedom seemed almost too good to believe, but the evidence was undeniable documented proof that I had been unconscious during the robbery, confirmed by multiple medical professionals who were willing to stake their reputations on their testimony. The court has to accept this evidence, Lisa said confidently. Medical records don't lie, and we have expert testimony confirming their reliability. Your innocence isn't a matter of opinion anymore, it's a documented medical fact. Once our motion for post-conviction relief was filed, the wheels of justice began moving with surprising speed. Judge Hawkins, the same judge who had presided over my original trial, ordered the prosecution to respond to our new evidence within 30 days. More importantly, she ordered the police to reopen their investigation into the Quick Mart robbery. Detective Johnson was no longer with the department, having retired the previous year. The case was assigned to Detective Maria Santos, a younger investigator who approached it with fresh eyes and modern forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 2019. When I read the original case file, Detective Santos told Lisa during a phone conference, I was struck by how quickly the investigation closed after Mr. Turner's arrest. They found a suspect who matched the description, got a positive ID, and stopped looking for other possibilities. The police report amendment that Detective Santos filed became a crucial piece of our case. She documented the investigative shortcuts that had led to my wrongful conviction and the new evidence that pointed to my innocence. Original investigation failed to thoroughly verify the defendant's medical alibi. Detective Santos wrote, hospital records now available conclusively prove Mr. Turner was unconscious during the robbery. Case requires complete reinvestigation. The breakthrough came when Detective Santos decided to re-examine the physical evidence using DNA analysis, techniques that had improved significantly since 2019. The robber had worn gloves, but he had also handled merchandise in the store before the robbery, potentially leaving trace evidence. We found skin cells on a candy bar wrapper that the robber touched, Detective Santos explained. The original investigation didn't test it because they thought they had their man. The DNA profile doesn't match Mr. Turner, but the DNA evidence did match someone in the criminal database. Marcus Thompson, a repeat offender with a history of armed robbery who lived just 2 miles from the Quick Mart. Thompson had been arrested 3 months after my conviction for a similar robbery across town. Thompson fits the physical description even better than Turner did, Detective Santos noted. Same height and build, but the facial structure is actually much closer to what the surveillance footage shows. When Detective Santos showed Billy Chen a new photo lineup that included Marcus Thompson, the young store clerk's certainty wavered for the first time. I'm not sure anymore, Billy admitted. This man looks very similar to what I remember. The original identification was made under stressful circumstances, and it's been several years. The convenience store clerk's admission of uncertainty was documented in a police report amendment that became part of our case file. Billy Chen, who had seemed so certain during my trial, now acknowledged that his memory might have been wrong. Witness Chen states that upon reflection and viewing additional suspects, he cannot be certain of his original identification, Detective Santos wrote. Stress and trauma can affect memory reliability, and the passage of time has made witness less confident in his testimony. Marcus Thompson initially denied involvement in the Quick Mart robbery, but when confronted with the DNA evidence and his history of similar crimes, he eventually confessed. His admission was devastating to the prosecution's original case against me. I needed money for drugs, Thompson told Detective Santos during his recorded confession. I knew the Quick Mart was an easy target because it was usually just one kid working nights. I never meant to hurt anyone. Thompson's confession included details about the robbery that had never been made public, information that only the real perpetrator could have known. He described the layout of the store, the exact amount of money stolen, and specific items he had touched before revealing his weapon. The subject's confession includes details consistent with crime scene evidence, Detective Santos documented. Thompson's account matches physical evidence and surveillance footage more accurately than the original case against Turner. The real robber had been walking free for 3 years while I rotted in prison for his crime. Thompson had committed to more armed robberies during that time, robberies that might have been prevented if the original investigation had been more thorough. Detective Santos's reinvestigation revealed multiple problems with the original case. The photo lineup had been suggestive, with my picture standing out from the others. The witness identification had been conducted under stressful circumstances, without proper psychological safeguards. Most importantly, the medical alibi that should have cleared me had been inadequately investigated. The original investigation suffered from confirmation bias. Detective Santos concluded in her report. Once Turner was identified as a suspect, investigators focused on building a case against him rather than thoroughly verifying his alibi or exploring other possibilities. The police department's embarrassment was evident in Detective Johnson's formal apology, delivered through the current chief of police. "We failed Mr. Turner and the community by rushing to judgment," the chief said in a written statement. "This case will serve as a reminder of the importance of thorough, unbiased investigation. But apologies couldn't give me back 3 years of my life. They couldn't undo the trauma of wrongful imprisonment, the loss of relationships, the damage to my family." The police report amendments documenting their mistakes were necessary for my legal case, but they were also permanent records of how badly the system had failed. Marcus Thompson was charged with the Quick Mart robbery and pleaded guilty, receiving a 5-year sentence. The same crime that had cost me years of freedom earned him the same punishment, but he was actually guilty. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in the case. As Detective Santos completed her reinvestigation, the evidence of my innocence became overwhelming. Medical records proved I was unconscious during the robbery. DNA evidence pointed to the real perpetrator. The actual robber had confessed. The original witness had admitted uncertainty about his identification. "This is one of the clearest cases of wrongful conviction I've ever seen," Detective Santos told Lisa. "Everything that could go wrong with an investigation went wrong in 2019. But everything that needs to go right for Mr. Turner is going right now." The courtroom was packed on the morning of my exoneration hearing. My family filled the front row, their faces a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. Lisa sat beside me at the defense table, our case files stacked high with medical records, DNA evidence, and witness statements that proved my innocence beyond any doubt. Judge Hawkins entered the courtroom with the same stern demeanor she had maintained throughout my original trial, but something was different in her expression. She had read our motion, reviewed the medical evidence, and studied Detective Santos's reinvestigation. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. "This court has reviewed the post-conviction relief motion filed by Mr. Turner's counsel," Judge Hawkins began. "The evidence presented is substantial and compelling. The medical records conclusively prove that Mr. Turner was unconscious under general anesthesia at the time of the robbery. The DNA evidence points to another perpetrator who has since confessed to the crime." DA Wells sat at the prosecution table, but her usual confidence was gone. She had filed a response to our motion that essentially conceded the case. The evidence was too overwhelming to dispute, and continuing to argue for my guilt would have been professionally embarrassing. "The state acknowledges that new evidence has come to light that undermines the original conviction," DA Wells said when called upon. "The medical documentation and DNA evidence present compelling proof of Mr. Turner's innocence. The state does not oppose the motion for post-conviction relief." Judge Hawkins looked directly at me as she prepared to deliver her ruling. "Mr. Turner, you have spent 3 years in prison for a crime you did not commit. This represents a fundamental failure of our justice system, and for that, this court offers its sincere apology." I felt tears building in my eyes as Judge Hawkins continued. "Based on the overwhelming evidence of your innocence, including detailed medical records proving you were unconscious during the robbery, and DNA evidence identifying the actual perpetrator, this court grants your motion for post-conviction relief." The gavel came down with finality. "The conviction of Alex Turner is hereby vacated and dismissed. All charges are dropped. Mr. Turner, you are free to go." The courtroom erupted. My mother started crying. My father shouted yes and reached over the barrier to embrace me. Lisa was beaming, her hard work finally vindicated. Even some of the court staff were smiling, recognizing that justice had finally been served. The exoneration certificate that Judge Hawkins signed was a simple document, but it represented everything I had fought for during 3 years in prison. "The court finds that Alex Turner is factually innocent of all charges and was wrongfully convicted." It read, "This exoneration is based on clear and convincing evidence of innocence." Walking out of Riverside Correctional Facility for the last time was surreal. I had imagined this moment countless times during my imprisonment, but the reality was almost overwhelming. The same guards who had processed me as prisoner 47,191 were now shaking my hand and wishing me well. Tommy was waiting at the gate to say goodbye. In 3 years, he had become more than a cellmate. He was the friend who had kept me sane, who had encouraged me to keep fighting when giving up seemed easier. "You did it, Alex," he said, gripping my hand firmly. "You proved that truth still matters. I couldn't have done it without your support, Tommy. You kept me from giving up. Now you go out there and live the life you deserve, and maybe help some other innocent people who are stuck in here." The reunion with my family was emotional and overwhelming. 3 years of separation ended in a parking lot outside the prison, with tears and embraces that seemed to last forever. My mother looked older, worn down by years of stress and worry. My father seemed smaller somehow, aged by the weight of watching his son suffer for something he didn't do. I never stopped believing in you, my mother said through her tears. Not for one day. We knew you were innocent, my father added. We just had to wait for the system to figure it out. The first night of freedom was strange and disorienting. My parents had prepared my old room exactly as I had left it, but I felt like a different person returning to a familiar place. Prison changes you in ways that freedom can't immediately undo. Simple things like choosing what to eat, when to sleep, where to go felt overwhelming after years of institutional routine. Lisa visited the next day to discuss the civil lawsuit we would file against the state for wrongful imprisonment. You're entitled to compensation for every day you spent in prison, she explained. The state has a fund for wrongfully convicted individuals, and your case is as clear-cut as they come. But money couldn't restore the 3 years I had lost, couldn't repair the relationships that had been damaged, couldn't erase the trauma of imprisonment. The exoneration certificate cleared my name legally, but rebuilding my life would take much longer. Dr. Morrison called to check on me, the same gentle voice that had explained my surgery 3 years earlier. I'm so sorry you went through this, Alex, she said. If I had known those medical records could have prevented your conviction, I would have moved heaven and earth to get them to your lawyer. It's not your fault, Dr. Morrison. You saved my life that night, and in the end, those same medical records saved my freedom. The exoneration made headlines in the local newspaper. Man freed after hospital records prove innocence. The story detailed how I had spent 3 years in prison, while the evidence of my innocence sat in hospital files. How the real robber had been walking free. How a law student's investigation had uncovered the truth. But beyond the headlines and legal documents, the most important thing was simple. I was free. Free to rebuild my life. Free to restore relationships. Free to prove that an innocent man could survive the system's worst mistakes and emerge with his dignity intact. The legal settlement with the state came 6 months after my exoneration. 3 years of wrongful imprisonment entitled me to $50,000 per year, totaling $150. Zero in compensation. It seemed like a lot of money until I calculated that it worked out to about $137 per day for the loss of my freedom, my reputation, and 3 years of my life. The settlement isn't just about money, Lisa explained as we reviewed the agreement. It's official acknowledgement that the state failed you. This document becomes part of the public record, showing that Alex Turner was wrongfully convicted and is entitled to compensation. The settlement agreement was more than a financial document, it was a formal apology from the state, an admission that their justice system had failed catastrophically. But no amount of money could truly compensate for what I had lost during those 3 years in prison. Marcus Thompson's conviction for the Quick-Mart robbery provided a different kind of justice. During his sentencing hearing, I was allowed to address the court about the impact of his crime, not just the robbery itself, but the years of wrongful imprisonment it had caused me. Your Honor, I said, standing at the podium in the same courtroom where I had been wrongfully convicted. Marcus Thompson's crime didn't just harm Billy Chen and the store that night. His actions, combined with a flawed investigation, cost me 3 years of my life. Thompson looked at me with what seemed like genuine remorse. He was a drug addict who had made terrible choices, but he wasn't evil. During his plea hearing, he had specifically apologized for the fact that his crime had led to my wrongful conviction. I'm sorry for what you went through, Thompson said when given the chance to speak. I never knew someone else was being blamed for what I did. If I had known, I would have come forward sooner. Judge Hawkins sentenced Thompson to 5 years in prison, the same sentence I had received for his crime. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom, but Thompson was actually guilty, and his punishment fit his actual actions. The real justice, though, came from the changes my case prompted in the local criminal justice system. The police department implemented new protocols for investigating alibis, requiring thorough documentation before closing cases. The public defender's office hired additional staff and created specialized units for complex cases. Your case exposed serious flaws in how we handle criminal investigations. Police Chief Williams admitted during a community forum, we've implemented new training requirements and investigative protocols to prevent this from happening again. But the personal healing was more complicated than systemic reform. 3 years in prison had left psychological scars that didn't disappear with legal vindication. I struggled with anxiety, depression, and a deep distrust of authority that would take years to overcome. The therapy sessions were difficult but necessary. Dr. Patricia Reed, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, helped me understand that my reactions were normal responses to abnormal circumstances. Wrongful conviction trauma is real and serious. Dr. Reed explained. You experience powerlessness, injustice, and institutional betrayal. Healing from that takes time and professional support. The therapy helped me process not just the prison experience, but the ongoing challenges of rebuilding my life. Simple things like job interviews became difficult when I had to explain the 3-year gap in my employment history. Even though I was legally innocent, the stigma of having been in prison followed me. Some relationships couldn't be repaired. Friends who had abandoned me during my imprisonment remained distant. Even after my exoneration, the girlfriend who had broken up with me had moved on with her life and wasn't interested in reconnecting. 3 years was a long time in the lives of people in their 20s, but other relationships grew stronger. My family had been tested by my wrongful conviction and had emerged more united than ever. My parents, who had never stopped believing in my innocence, became my strongest supporters as I rebuilt my life. The relationship with Lisa evolved beyond attorney and client. She had fought for my freedom when no one else would, had believed in my innocence when the evidence seemed stacked against me. We began dating 6 months after my release, building a relationship founded on shared purpose and mutual respect. I fell in love with your determination to prove your innocence, Lisa told me one evening as we walked through the park near Northwestern University. You never gave up hope, even when everyone else had written you off. The settlement money allowed me to make a fresh start. I used part of it to enroll in community college, working toward a degree in criminal justice. My goal was to help other wrongfully convicted individuals, to use my experience to prevent others from suffering as I had. You have credibility that lawyers and advocates can never have, Professor Williams observed when I applied to volunteer with the Wrongful Conviction Clinic. You've lived through wrongful conviction and emerged stronger. That experience is invaluable for helping others. Billy Chen reached out to me a year after my exoneration, wanting to apologize for his mistaken identification. We met at a coffee shop near the community college. 2 young men whose lives had been forever changed by one terrible night. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Billy said, his voice heavy with guilt. I was so sure it was you. I never imagined I could be wrong about something so important. You were traumatized and trying to do the right thing, I told him. The system failed both of us that night. You're not responsible for the investigations, mistakes. The settlement agreement sat framed on my desk at home, not as a trophy but as a reminder. It represented justice delayed but not denied. A system that had failed but eventually corrected itself. Most importantly, it was proof that truth could prevail. Even when buried under bureaucracy and incompetence, the healing process would continue. For years, but I learned something important during my ordeal. Resilience was a choice. Hope was a decision. And justice, while sometimes slow, was worth fighting for no matter how long it took. 2 years after my exoneration, I stood before a classroom of first-year law students at Northwestern University, wearing the volunteer badge that had become a symbol of my new purpose in life. The Innocence Project volunteer badge represented more than just my role with the Wrongful Conviction Clinic. It represented my transformation from victim to advocate. How many of you believe the criminal justice system is infallible? I asked the class. A few hands went up tentatively. I spent 3 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit because people believed that same thing. Today, I want to tell you why that belief is dangerous and what you can do to prevent wrongful convictions. The students listened intently as I told my story, from the emergency appendectomy that saved my life to the hospital records that proved my innocence. They took notes, asked questions, and seemed genuinely moved by the reality that innocent people could be convicted based on incomplete investigations and circumstantial evidence. The medical records that exonerated me were sitting in a hospital filing cabinet the entire time. I explained. My public defender made a few phone calls and gave up. Lisa Chen, who was a student just like you, spent months navigating hospital bureaucracy to find the truth. The difference was that she cared enough to keep looking. After each presentation, students would approach me with questions about the legal system, about wrongful convictions, about how they could make a difference. Some were inspired to volunteer with innocence projects. Others chose to specialize in criminal defense. And a few decided to become prosecutors committed to seeking truth rather than just conviction. As speaking at law schools had become my mission, my way of turning a terrible experience into something meaningful. Each presentation reached 30 or 40 future lawyers, prosecutors, and judges who would remember my story when they encountered cases where the evidence seemed to need, where alibis needed thorough investigation, where the rush to conviction might obscure the pursuit of truth. Lisa and I had married the previous year. A small ceremony attended by family and the friends who had supported us through the darkest times. Tommy Rodriguez was there, recently released after serving his full sentence. Working now as a counselor for ex-offenders. Dr. Morrison attended, along with several nurses from Mercy General who had helped find the medical records that saved me. You'd have found each other in the fight for justice. Tommy said during his toast at our reception, "That's the kind of love that can change the world." Our relationship was built on shared purpose and mutual respect, forged in the crucible of fighting for truth when everyone else had given up. Lisa had risked her career by taking on a case that seemed hopeless, and I had found the strength to keep believing in justice when the system seemed determined to crush that belief. The work with wrongfully convicted individuals was difficult, but rewarding. Through the Wrongful Conviction Clinic, I helped investigate cases, wrote letters to potential clients, and provided emotional support to people going through what I had experienced. My volunteer badge gave me access to prisons, to legal conferences, to the network of advocates working to reform the criminal justice system. Alex understands what our clients are going through in a way that lawyers can't, Professor Williams observed. He's lived in prison as an innocent man. He knows the desperation, the loss of hope, the psychological impact of wrongful conviction. That experience makes him invaluable to our work. Each case was different, but the patterns were familiar: inadequate defense representation, incomplete investigations, witness misidentification, prosecutorial tunnel vision. The system's flaws that had condemned me were systemic problems, affecting hundreds of innocent people across the country. My own case had become a teaching tool for legal and law enforcement professionals. The medical records that proved my innocence were studied in courses on evidence collection. Detective Santos' reinvestigation was used to train police officers about confirmation bias and the importance of thoroughly investigating alibis. The Turner case shows how multiple system failures can combine to convict an innocent person. Detective Santos would tell training classes: inadequate defense investigation, incomplete evidence collection, witness misidentification, and prosecutorial pressure to close cases quickly. Any one of these problems is serious, but together they created a perfect storm of injustice. The personal healing continued, supported by therapy, family, and the meaningful work of helping others. The nightmares had mostly stopped, the anxiety attacks were manageable, and the deep anger had transformed into determination to prevent others from suffering as I had. My message to wrongfully convicted individuals was always the same: never give up hope, keep fighting for truth, and remember that your story matters. The system might fail you temporarily, but justice delayed is not justice denied if you refuse to stop believing in your innocence. I spent 3 years in prison because a hospital filing cabinet was too hard to navigate, I would tell new clients. But those same records eventually set me free. The truth is always out there somewhere. We just have to be willing to look hard enough to find it. The volunteer badge I wore represented more than just my work with the Innocence Project. It represented the belief that one person's determination to seek truth could overcome systemic failures, that justice was worth fighting for no matter how long it took, and that even the worst injustices could be transformed into forces for positive change. As I looked at that badge each morning, I remember the scared young man who had been sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. That man had survived 3 years in prison and emerged stronger, not bitter. He had found love, purpose, and the power to help others facing similar struggles. The hospital records that proved my innocence were now part of legal history, studied by students and cited in court cases across the country. But more importantly, they were proof that truth eventually prevails when good people refuse to give up the fight for justice. My story was no longer just about wrongful conviction, it was about redemption, resilience, and the power of one person's refusal to accept injustice. That story would continue as long as there were innocent people in prison and advocates willing to fight for their freedom.